able to get right up in there, in range, and deal some damage. He did manage to take out a couple of tanks, but Fantasy's defense holds. Fantasy still has a large tank force, but he really just hasn't had the economic strength to be able to produce the vultures. He's been forced to throw away his vultures on harass maneuvers, and therefore hasn't had a large enough force to really make an effective Terran push, and that's not where you want to be as a Terran player, not being able to make that push, and that command center still not being able to go down at that 1 o'clock position. Cal, meanwhile, has taken the 4 o'clock expansion as well, and now he's got Zealot speed upgraders, so he's going to be able to take this expansion down. Arbiter coming in, trying to provide those Zealots with some cover, and Fantasy does have defensive layers. His siege tanks are unsieged as well. That does give him a slight advantage in fighting this mobile force of Cal's, but unfortunately for Fantasy, he doesn't have a large number of vultures. He manages to just get a small number of vultures in front of his siege tanks, and now he's got the science vessel res, and he's pushing Cal back. Cal fighting a retreating battle, but you just feel that Fantasy has got less units on the ground than Cal actually has, and that definitely gives Cal a big advantage in this matchup. Fantasy still not able to secure that expansion, but Cal has to be careful here. He doesn't want to risk getting his army cornered in the top right hand corner of the map and getting taken out. Now he's bringing those Dragoons around. He's going to try and snipe that command center. If he snipes that command center, that's going to be a huge loss for Fantasy. Some of the Dragoons hitting the racks. The command center is safe. Fantasy manages to pull it back, and he's going to get a repair on it. Meanwhile, Cal circling around the rear of Fantasy's Natural Expo to try and attack that from behind. But Fantasy has done a remarkable job of defending in this game, it has to be said. Cal has put pressure on him, but he's done a great job of counter-attacking and defending. But you just feel that Cal is developing weight of numbers here. He's got the larger army on the ground than Fantasy does. He's got a better position, and Cal, once again, Fantasy trying to defend. He brings a couple of siege tanks out. They get sniped straight away, and Fantasy is just defending with the bare minimum number of Terran forces here, and you feel it's only a matter of time before Cal is... And great EMP by Fantasy, EMPing the Arbiter, taking out all the energy. And you haven't seen, despite the fact that Cal had Arbiter fairly early on, long before Fantasy even started building a science facility, Cal had his first Arbiter out, I believe, and yet Cal hasn't been able to do a single recall or a freeze, and that's down to Fantasy, first of all, intercepting that first Arbiter. The second Arbiter coming in, another EMP, and that Arbiter is not going to have the energy to do a recall. It's also going to get chased down probably by that Wraith following it around, and so Cal trying to distract Fantasy, coming in for the recall into the main to try and finish this game, but unfortunately not able to do so. Fantasy fighting hard, keeping himself in this game. And meanwhile, Fantasy's actually intercepted most of Cal's forces, and it looks like Fantasy now, with the advantage, you have to feel that Fantasy's got an advantage here now, guys, because Cal has lost his forces. He hasn't been able to use those Arbiters. Fantasy has been emptying them, and Cal doesn't have a large-sized army on the ground anymore. Fantasy's army has grown slowly over the course of the game, and he's got a decent-sized army. Cal now, once again, pushing forward in the middle of the map. This matchup has been a huge battle, but Fantasy doesn't have any vultures in front of those siege tanks. He does have spider mines that are going to delay Cal's advance slightly, and he doesn't have that Arbiter to cloak those Zealots, but Cal is going to be forced to pull back yet again. Meanwhile, Fantasy has resecured that expansion at the 1 o'clock position, and you feel that Fantasy is actually coming back in this game now, and actually I wouldn't be surprised. And Cal once again coming in for the drop. This time he will get the recall off finally at his third attempt. A second Arbiter coming in as well. We're probably going to see another recall here. Recall in the National Expo, and that Arbiter heading, I believe, towards that 1 o'clock expansion, and Fantasy might lose 2 expansions in a row here. There is going to be a recall. Fantasy defends brilliantly though, not losing that expansion, and you can see just the dead bodies, the wasteland of Dragoons, about 8 Dragoons dead next to that Natural Expo of Fantasy's, and Cal's attack turning into a big failure here, and Fantasy has turned this game around, guys, and I think Fantasy's actually going to win this matchup. Fantasy's got a massive Terran tank force here, and by keeping Cal off balance and preventing him from cementing that economic advantage, Cal with a small recall of about 6 units, but really this isn't going to do any damage to Fantasy whatsoever. I don't know, guys, for some reason I was convinced Cal was going to win this game, but Fantasy has turned it around with his Arbiter sniping and emping, and Cal now coming in, trying to take out Fantasy's forces in the middle of the map. Fantasy leaving himself slightly vulnerable, and a great freeze as well, catching about 3 siege tanks, but it's not going to be enough because Fantasy has now got enough numbers, enough weight of numbers to be able to resist that sort of attack. The lone Dragoon at the 1 o'clock expansion isn't going to bother Fantasy too much, and Cal now circling around, realizing he's got to do something here, but he's in huge trouble. Fantasy has just defended and slowly defended and expanded, and Cal just not been able to put the pressure on, and now Cal is going to lose that expansion at the 8 o'clock expansion. And it looks like it will not be 2 losses for the SKT1 Terran Star in a row. He is going to secure this win when it looked like his opponent had the advantage, and really Cal unable to put the pressure on and finish off the game after the strong early advantage. Managing to get a freeze on, and it looks like he is going to take this expansion out while Fantasy's forces are taking out his 8 o'clock expansion. He's going to be able to pick off that expansion, and the command center gets taken off, gets sniped. Meanwhile, but unfortunately for Cal, his forces are now trapped in that top right-hand corner, in the northeast corner of the map, map. His main army, his main ground force is now trapped, and he's not going to be able to get out there. In fact, he's got a massive ground force. He's got about 20 siege tanks to Cal's 2 dragoons. Cal coming in with reinforcements, and Cal's reinforcements dying piecemeal, coming to the slaughter one by one. And really, that's not what you want to. That's not the kind of situation you want to be in. Cal managed to get a couple of Zealot bombs off, not effective, and Fantasy just overrunning him with siege tanks. And you've got to say, Fantasy has played this brilliant tactically. All the advantages against him, the statistics of the map, the statistics of the players. I believe Protoss versus Terran versus Protoss is also Fantasy's strongest matchup. However, another great EMP by Fantasy to that Arbiter, and he's just going to polish off Cal's forces, and Cal committing himself to the northeastern theater, attacking in that part of the map, and unfortunately getting his unit sniped. And those 2 Arbiters are in a very vulnerable state right now. A lone Goliath will probably be enough to take them out, or a lone Wraith. And Fantasy able to fight Zealots with just siege tanks, because he's just got such a huge economy compared to Cal's. And Cal is in dire straits right now. So Fantasy, it has to be said, played a smart game, kept the pressure up on Cal with his Vulture Harass, and then when the crucial turning point came, when the Arbiters arrived, Fantasy prevented Cal from making use of them, and really he's just outplayed Cal here. He's just out-microed. Despite Cal having the better initial start, he's been Fantasy has just out-macroed him, and really out-thought him. Despite having a build order disadvantage, in my opinion. So a great play by Fantasy. Meanwhile, he's resecured that 1 o'clock expansion. Cal, with that shuttle, is about to get sniped with the Goliaths, and spider mines all over the map have really hurt Cal in this game. He just hasn't had an answer, and this is just down to Fantasy's multitasking. He's just got superior technical skills to Cal, and Cal just hasn't been able to compete. Fantasy now bringing the Vultures in, and Cal with just a skeleton force of units, stragglers, left on the map. And it's just only a matter of seconds before Fantasy closes this game out. Well played, GG. It's going to be 1-0 SKT1 versus STX on destination, and this map produces yet another great matchup, another great comeback. Fantasy looked like he was in trouble, but he held on, held his advantage, defended, and GG. I think a lot of players might find this sort of playstyle of Terran annoying, where they just sit back and are so hard to break down, but the onus was on Cal with the advantage, and he didn't cement it. And I feel that he did. He was trying to finish the game off too early on, as opposed to expanding his advantage and getting his economy stronger, and he let Fantasy back into the game. GG guys, this is Klazart, thanks for listening.